What's up, folks? I just linked up with my barber. He just put me down with dat fade. Now I'm back here to make this video covering UFC 316. Merab versus Sean O'Malley 2 with Juliana Pena versus Kayla Harrison in the co-main event. The first Merab unanimous decision was so nice, the UFC had to do it twice, minus the Sphere. I will note that for this card being an O'Malley headliner, it's pretty top heavy with him and Merab. We do have some pretty good fights all throughout, but if Sean O'Malley was still a contender in 2025, John Jones versus Tom Aspinall would happen on the prelims of this card, and JDM would be the featured fight, and Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira would be the prelim featured fight. They would either always load Sean O'Malley's card, or they went kind of skinny for the last lineup of fights that they took into the Sphere, but they were just at the Sphere, so it was still a big event. I think that they're willing to let this one go, though, as far as dumping a bunch of promo into an O'Malley fight, because the UFC knows that whenever it's Merab, he always runs the chance of getting wood chipped again, so we still have some good fights to watch. I'm going to watch all of them. I'm going to talk about all of them right now. The prelim opener on the early prelims is going to be Quillan, Quillan, I don't know how to say it, versus Yanal Ashmouz. This is going to be a lightweight fight. I will enjoy it very much because Quillan has been getting thrown some softballs throughout his 2-fight UFC career. On the Contender Series, he fought with Gage Yun, who just recently got handled by Evan Elder in a very non-eventful decision that he was able to win super easily, Evan Elder over Gage Yun. I had actually picked Gage Young to win that fight too because of his fight with Quillan. They had a pretty wild fight on the Contender Series, but so far it's only really amounted to anything for Salkilld. He knocked out Anshul Jubli. That doesn't really even count. Yanal Ashmouz is cool because he's an Israeli Muslim. He represents Israel, but he is a Muslim. Everyone has picked sides with the whole Gaza beef thing. You know, you're either Israel or Palestine, or you're Muslim or you're Jewish, or you're Jones versus Aspinall, and everyone just kind of stays on their side. And I like Yanal Ashmouz because he's proving that several things can be true at the same time. Individuals like him who stay neutral in the middle of two sides who are often extreme give me hope for this world and the fact that we may all be able to sit down at the same table and share a meal at one point. Yanal Ashmouz usually gets scheduled to fight early into the prelims of these numbered cards, and he's a very well-rounded MMA fighter who always makes a good account of himself, except for in a fight with Chris Duncan where he broke his arm in round 1. Chris Duncan is also hosting an MMA promotion in Scotland, which is cool because I'm not sure if they have a machine to go through before they get to Cage Warriors or some other UK promotion before making it to the UFC. He's doing a good thing. I hope that promotion succeeds. But aside from this, Yanal Ashmouz really reminds me of Thiago Moises from around the time whenever he was fighting Islam Makhachev, like 2021 Thiago Moises, whenever, because he had the close fight with Islam Makhachev, it wasn't a close fight. He had a fight with Islam Makhachev, and Makhachev had just been eating people all the way up until this point. He looked pretty solid. Thiago Moises looked like a passable MMA fighter in his fight with Islam Makhachev, and people gave notice to that. And I could say the same thing for Yanal Ashmouz. He's a pretty solid middle-of-the-road contender who doesn't specialize in one thing, but has better strike defense and wrestling than a prime Thiago Moises that I would just mention right now. The well-roundedness of Ashmouz made it keep this fight on the cage. He'd probably prefer to clinch than to stand at range with Quillan Salkilld, just because of the danger that poses for anyone in this weight class. Or like Moises, after fighting with Makhachev, they immediately scheduled him to fight with Joel Alvarez, so he may just be getting a physical beast at this weight class that he won't be able to contain with his skill set. Quillan is not very directed with his kicking offense. His boxing definitely has a lot more sting than his kicks, and his leg kicks are often thrown to slap the calf versus him sitting down on these strikes to do meaningful damage to someone's legs. He's just really chipping away to be able to enter with his hands. He only puts great power into these boxing combinations, and that's something that I will note from him. Most of his UFC finishes are probably going to come from punches, just because that is stylistically how he prefers to dispatch his opponents. Salkilld has some pretty Swiss cheese takedown defense, is something I noticed whenever I was watching his footage on Fight Pass. But he's a pretty responsible scrambler who works really well out of butterfly guard. He works those hooks, and he's always activating his legs in these guards, and while people are trying to pass and set up subs while he's driving these butterfly hooks into their chest, they kind of forget where his legs are sometimes, and they'll overextend through a position and fall into a triangle choke, or they'll get swept and he'll kick them high into the air and they'll fly up and he'll move his body parallel to them, where he'll either take the back from north-south position if that's how he lands, or if they're just laying side by side, he'll sit over in the side control and start winning the fight that way. And he always does this. He's always working those butterfly hooks. So if this fight does go to the ground, Quillan Salkild's scrambling is comprised of him creating space to create more space. So if he can get one of those hooks in between him and Yanal Ashmouz, he's probably going to be able to stand up. And I think this will be a recurring theme of the fight. He will be way too physical for Yanal Ashmouz to control. I think that Quillan Salkilld is a passable enough grappler to not get exposed by Yanal Ashmouz on the ground. and he's powerful enough to chin him by freak accident. His right hand has been blessed by God, and he does a really good job in the Muay Thai clinch with knees. So I think this fight will perfectly mirror Moises versus Alvarez. The more that I was thinking about it, I can't see this going any other way than a Salkilld round 1 KO. The next fight that we have to break down is going to be one taking place in the featherweight division. We have Jekah Seragih versus Ju Sang-yu. Ju Sang-yu is a talent who comes to the UFC from Z Fight Night, which is a Korean MMA promotion hosted by Chang Sung-jung, the Korean zombie, who he's probably the #1 talent scout for the UFC with this promotion in Asia, since this promotion is like Korea's Cage Warriors, and they have a bunch of Japanese fighters and other local Asian prospects that are coming over to fight on the circuit, which is also hosted on UFC Fight Pass. So I got to see all this guy's footage from Z Fight Night. He does a good job. Ju Sang-yu is a lot like the flyweight Hung Sung Park, who we just saw finish Carlos Hernandez on the Morales versus Burns card. Korea is doing better than a lot of countries in terms of the talent that they're able to produce from new MMA prospects, especially whenever we're talking about featherweight. They have Cheng Ho Lee, Jung Young Lee, and then this guy who I think is also going to be pretty good. So as strikers, most Koreans are boxers as opposed to kickboxers. Not many kick-heavy offenses. I haven't seen one of these guys ever throw a wheel kick, I don't think. But they often vary from Chandler to McGregor styles of boxing. I would say that Hung Sung Park from last week against Carlos Hernandez was more of a Michael Chandler-esque boxer. He's going to get in there and just throw bombs. Maybe not focused on moving his head off the center line or being dynamic with his movement in general to make sure that he's avoiding damage. Ju Sang-yu is going to be like a Conor McGregor archetype. I find that whether or not these Korean prospects box more like Michael Chandler or Conor McGregor if they favor themselves as strikers is mostly dependent on their body types. Ju Sang-yu is a pretty long and slender striker. He's going to have physical advantages over Jekah Seragih, who should probably be competing in bantamweight. The craziest bit though is that all of these Korean prospects now can grapple, and I don't know where they're learning how to wrestle so well there. Who's teaching these guys how to wrestle? Mahashkala and Dagestan might just secretly be in South Korea and we don't know about it. Has anyone seen Dagestan on the globe? It might be in South Korea. Someone check. Jekah is an Indonesian prospect, and he fights like a true Thai man. This guy literally thinks he's Ratang, and he always enters with his right hand with no setup. He blew off a glove touch in his fight with Wesson Wilson to score this right hand that he gets ahead with in a fight. It was so cheeky. He fake glove touched like UFC 5. Wesson Wilson was eating some big shots because Jekah Seragih did some cheap stuff, but he ended up getting taken down. Jekah Seragih, he went for the same right hand that got rolled, and he was just double-legged in the middle of the cage. So as far as throwing the right cross goes, he really does live and die by the sword. He can be unorthodox, though. Sometimes this is credence to, he probably does come from a Muay Thai background, and I think that this will help him in neutral clinches where nothing is taking place. The thing that Ju Sang-yu will have a clear advantage over Jekah Seragih in is the grappling. I just said all these Korean prospects can grapple. For some reason, they're just amazing at wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Jekah Seragih is a really weak grappler. This dude fights like he has Super Like and Rodtang posters all over his room. And his Muay Thai isn't that effective. And whenever it's not as effective to win fights on the feet, Jekah Seragih always has the option to be controlled on the ground by anyone. Anshul Jubilee was able to score a win over this guy. Jekah Seragih was a contributing factor to how Anshul Jubilee was able to fight in the UFC because he beat him in a fight. And that should never be true about any UFC talent, that they're out here losing to Anshul Jubilee. And I don't mean to throw shots at that guy, but like, come on, dude. My guess is that in 3 years, we're going to have a bunch of Korean prospects that are beloved in the community. And that's just because so many are active right now. It's only a matter of time for one of them to go on a crazy run. So I'm going to select Yu via round 1 submission. He's going to take this guy down however he wants, and he's going to nuke him on the floor, and it's not going to take any time at all. The next fight taking place on the early prelims is going to be Arianne Lipski de Silva versus Cong Wang. This is a women's flyweight fight, and my heart goes out to whatever player married Arianne Lipski de Silva and has to deal with the fact that she still hyphenates her name. If you're a hooper and your ball is hyphenating her last name, that's not your ball. They've been playing with it outside. There's no grip on it. But I actually do see what they're doing here. They want the whole fan base to rally behind Cong Wang, and they're giving her perfect opportunities to get knockout wins with this type of scheduling. Lipski is pretty, but she's 17-10 and overall redundant against any other woman who knows how to fight decently. And on this night, she'll be fighting the female Song Yadong with relative power. Cong Wang does hit really hard, and that's why Lipski is getting boomed in this fight. And I know this because she's already been snuffed in one of her fights before by Priscilla Cachoeira, who is not good at MMA. And that's been proven in fights against Jasmine Jasudavicius and Miranda Maverick, where she lost both of them. But she can stop women on the feet, as she has with Lipski and just recently Josiane Nunez, which not a lot of people were expecting her to do that. This is a quality only some girls at this weight class have, so the UFC really does appreciate these prospects. And they will give them fights that are kind of low-hanging fruit for them to just get free wins for the promotion to get more views and engagement with online. Priscilla started her KO sequence against Arianne Lipski with a left hook that badly hurt her, and she pressed her into the cage and she threw like 47 more punches to get Arianne to fall and for the ref to call it. Wang can set up the same check hook with a 1-2 like she did against Victoria Leonardo, or she can just throw it naked, and both approaches are going to be effective. Arianne Lipski has a bad habit of skate 3 spread eagling her arms out by her waist whenever she resets after her combos, and she'll do this no matter where she is in the cage, and I think that Wang can come out and win in 6 strikes thrown or less if she picks her shots well. Wang made the same mistake that Joe Pyfer did against Jack Hermanson in her last fight. She was headhunting, and she fell asleep at the wheel because the first girl that she fought was so easy to knock out that she thought that she'd probably just be able to do the same thing to the entire division. And she got hurt for having irresponsible defense that time, and for spinning all of her gas, trying to be flashy and throw strikes like hook kicks and wheel kicks at Gabriela Fernandez. Lipski is 100% a girl who Wang knows that she can brutally knock out. And so this flashy, unorthodox approach may work better here for her if she's committed to being a fun fighter and not a winning one. I'd personally like to see some takedowns out of Wang and some control on the ground, with some ground and pound, maybe a submission as well, just to show that she does have a diverse skill set and that she's capable of making it through this division and towards the belt. Because Shevchenko or any of the other top fighters in this division aren't just going to hold a fight with her on the feet exclusively. Maybe Natalia Silva, because she's really like that, but the rest of them are going to wrestle her, so she needs to demonstrate that she can do that. It would be less fun, but I'd like to see Wang put on a Grant Dawson masterclass before finding a submission in round 2 or 3, just to prove that it is possible for her to pull this off. I know I just got done saying all that, but I'm still going to pick a Wang brutal round 1 KO. I don't care, bro. I know what the people want. I know what I want to see too. We love well-rounded prospects, but we love knockouts more. Marquel Mederos versus Mark Choinski will be the next fight at lightweight. Marquel Mederos got Ebola last week and couldn't fight Balaji Oki, but Dana White scooped his reboot card and boxed up and hit the van one time, so he's good now. The punishment that Marquel Mederos must endure now for not making it to his last bout is fighting with a guy with the last name Choinski. I was looking at Choinski's footage on UFC Fight Pass, and whenever I'm watching these fighters on tape, I always try to find their finishes first to see how they like to finish fights, because sometimes you'll see a guy exclusively finishes with strikes, KOs, and TKOs, never grapples. Other times, the only time that you'll see these 3-round fights be finished in like 6 or 7 minutes on the VODs on the UFC Fight Pass is whenever they're choking people. Mark Choinski is one of those guys, and his finishes are unfortunately against a couple of brothers who just didn't know how to grapple. And all he had to do was just survive on the feet a little bit until their gas tanks wore, and then he would just blast double in and complete the takedown and choke them right where he took them down. And it would all happen in about 15 seconds because they were so gassed. That wasn't enough for me. I needed to see more of his striking and his grappling actually be tested against a guy who's not bad at fighting. So I found him in a fight with Ricky Simone's little brother. His name is John Simone. I was pretty on the fence as to whether or not they were related at first, but they both train out of Vancouver, Washington, so they have to be related. There's no way they're not. In this fight, I noticed that Choinski's striking is pretty laxed, and it's all directed at securing takedowns. Marquel Mederos is pretty pressuring, but he's very open, and his arms stay very high. This guy boxes like he watched 8 hours of Anderson Silva's striking highlights straight and just went into the gym and was like, I can do that. It works for him, though. He's able to get to finishes, Marquel Mederos, but I'm not sure how he's going to do against the takedown. A lot of these fights on the card are striker-grappler matchups. I don't know how a lot of these fighters are going to do with stuffing the takedown. Choinski's striking is nothing more than a smokescreen to set him up to be able to get in on single legs. He always gets to wrestling sequences, and if those guys aren't good, like the dudes that I saw from APFC that he fought, he's just going to choke them immediately because his finishing instincts on the ground are actually pretty serviceable. But if a grappler is equally as experienced as him, they're probably just going to stalemate on the ground, and the more physical fighter will pull ahead on the feet just because he's not the strongest guy and his striking isn't very powerful at all. But Choinski is very heavy on front headlocks. He'll snatch later on into the fights just to wear his opponent out. And this is just some wrestling stuff. He's just going to make you carry his weight. And that's a very smart tactic for MMA, especially whenever he's tired and his opponent is tired as well. Because he does gas, but he always seems to make his opponent get more tired than he does. So that's an advantage that he has. Choinski is like a bizarre realm Ludovic Klein. Choinski is about as good at striking as Klein is at grappling, which is his weak suit, Klein, as a wrestler. And even though Klein isn't as good at wrestling as he is at striking, he can still wrestle. That's the way I feel about Choinski. He can still strike, but he is a grappler. I would even say, though, that because of his grappling, Choinski is more defensively sound because he can keep himself safer in the clinch and whenever he's tied up on the floor, if that does happen, because he either got swept or is tired. And being that Choinski is an All-American wrestler, and he's one of the All-American wrestlers from American colleges that can effectively implement this style in the octagon, I'd say that he could probably even beat Ludovic Klein just off of the fact that he does grapple pretty well. I actually kind of hope that I regret not picking Mederos and that he delivers a brutal knockout and we all get a great new prospect from the Dana White Contender Series. But after further review, there's no way that I'm going to select the guy taking Austin Hubbard to split decision in his last fight, where he spent half of it on the cage or on his back to stop a fighter with a takedown threat like Mark Choinski. With all the time that Mederos spent losing this fight in different grappling positions, Choinski would probably submit him down there. So going back to striking, defense, and output in general, he does pretty well with that. I would say that even though he's not an insanely polished striker, Mark Choinski, there's still a lot of things that he does right, to the point where I would say that he doesn't just come out here and get knocked out immediately by Mederos. So I'm going to pick him to win by a round 2 submission. Mark Choinski's debut will be a memorable one. The next fight is going to be Andreas Gustaffson, the little brother of Alexander Gustaffson, and he's going to be fighting Khaos Williams in the welterweight division. This is a hype fight since 2 of Andreas Gustafsson's attempts at debuting have been rim-packed. First by him getting a spinal injury. A day before his scheduled fight, he was training, doing a little bit of pad work, maybe some grappling, and got a spinal injury and had to get major spinal fusion surgery. And now he's coming back, and before he was supposed to fight Trevin Giles, he was supposed to fight Trevin Giles last week, and Trevin Giles was cutting weight and he fell and hit his head on the ground. So he got 10-6 round by a concrete floor, and that was the reason why Andreas Gustaffson didn't fight whenever he was scheduled to last week. A bunch of fights fell through because Marquel Mederos was also supposed to fight on the same card. So I'm glad that we could get some quick turnarounds on these fighters whose fights went up in smoke. All I really have to go off of as far as who Alexander Gustafsson is this cartoon fight that he got into with a fighter from a Swedish promotion called FCR MMA. The fight looked like Hayani Dos Santos versus Alice Ardelian from last week, but they are men, so they were doing visceral damage to each other and they were bleeding a lot. And Gustaffsson made a post about how he planned to approach this fight. And before I saw this post, I was kind of on the fence as to whether or not he enjoyed his fights always becoming brawls. As I was going through his footage, I was just thinking to myself, wow, these fights are insanely violent. Does he care about the fact that, like, he can't do this forever? Or is he just here for a good time and not a long one? And after I saw this post, that confirmed that he 100% does like bleeding. And lucky for him, we're a fan base who enjoys this sort of thing. So he's either going to get brutally KO'd off of a counter 2 minutes into the first round of this fight, or he will push Kalen Williams to his limits and he will break him. Option 2 is infinitely more fun in my opinion. Khaos Williams used to win fights by KOs in the first round even, against Alex Morono and Abdul Razak Al Hassan, and he was able to get to these finishes because he kind of fights the same way as Gustaffsson, but this is straight up really good matchmaking. As far as fighting the same way as Gustaffsson, what I mean is that both of their styles are very inefficient as far as mitigating damage to themselves personally, and also not tiring themselves out by missing, but they can win fights with the way that they both approach them. They both always end up taking way too much damage, and both often score finishes in the phone booth, taking a shot to land their own. More of Gus's finishes are making people quit in later rounds by exhausting them, because Andreas Gustaffsson does not care about living and his own life or livelihood. This man has no regard for human life. If Williams doesn't find a finish in his fights, most of the time he can rely on them going to decisions because he is a guy who scores in the late rounds with his knockouts once he's worn down his opponent a little bit. And it takes him about this long because of his low output compared to Gustaffsson, who fights like he's trying to go home and get on the Xbox. Like he's trying to check to see what's new in the Fortnite shop for today. Like this dude is really trying to get out of there. And I don't mean that as in like he's fighting like Ilia Topuria where it's very measured, like he's trying to knock the guy out. He'll get knocked out if it's taking too long. This guy is a Viking that they broke out of an ice block, and he just came out pissed off, and now they're having him fight Khaos Williams. As I said before, Khaos Williams can rely on his fights going to decision most of the time. Gustaffson is not about to let this fight go to decision, but he's more of a risk to himself and will set up the perfect sequence for Khaos Williams to knock him out without Khaos Williams having to do any work other than swing his hand. So as I watch this footage, Khaos Williams is a style like Ramiz Brahimaj, where he'll crash and he'll trade a really hard punch that he'll throw for a setup punch to land from his opponent, and if they don't have a crazy chin, he'll score through it and he'll do serious damage with the shot that he lands over theirs. Andreas Gustaffson is just going to walk him down, windmilling his arms, so I think that's why he's going to score a round 2 knockout. They'll competitively box you out the early going, and then Andreas Gustaffson is going to get lazy and he's going to get greedy, and Khaos Williams is going to catch him with his arm elbow deep inside of the cookie jar, and he's going to get flatline KO'd. And that's how I see this going. Sergei Spivac versus Waldo Cortez Acosta, a heavyweight fight. My 9/11 was watching Marcin Tybura get subbed in round 1 by Spivac. 2 minutes and 45 seconds into All I Need by Radiohead started playing as he verbally tapped that armbar. That really broke my heart, man. I used to gas up Mick Parkin and talk about how he's replaced Parker Porter as the FMF champion now that Derek Lewis has been forced to vacate the title. But it's always been Tybura, and maybe not Parkin since he lost to Tybura. But I like to consider Marcin to be significantly better than all other fat heavyweights, Acosta included. And Waldo Cortez Acosta isn't Romanov levels of stink, but he isn't the grappler that Spivac is, and that's how Spivac wins all of his fights. Acosta has had the grace of fighting people who would never attempt to wrestle him a day in their lives. Rebels de Spain, who he was able to grapple into the canvas and just wet blanket for 3 rounds. And also Ryan Spann, who he was able to knock out in round 2 of their fight. And he did this at range with a pretty jab lead hook that he threw in sequence, but that's a light heavyweight, so... Sergei Spivac is one of those hybrid fighters. He's a lot like Jailton Almeida, even though Jailton Almeida is better because he just beat him. Sergei Spivac is one of those fighters who's in the middle of a true light heavyweight and a true heavyweight, who's just maneuverable enough to make his style of fighting work for him, which is heavy takedown offense and aggressive submissions once the fight hits the ground. The one time that Waldo Cortez Acosta was made to grapple defensively, it was against Marcos Rogério de Lima. I'm not even sure if people still remember him. I feel like an OG for the fact that the memory of that guy's fight against Derek Lewis is still very fresh in my head. And he went 3-7 with his shots, and he controlled 5 minutes of this fight. De Lima did against Waldo Cortez Acosta. De Lima has a strong low kick, and he used this to square Acosta's stance and to push him into the cage while neutralizing his jab because he couldn't put weight on his lead foot. Once his back was on the fence, De Lima blast doubled and then elevated to secure the first takedown. And it was the same thing in other moments of the fight where he was just pulling double legs off the cage. But this kick-heavy offense going into the first round, where he used it to set up the first takedown, Rogério de Lima, makes me think that Spivac can use this entry to be successful the same way in a fight against Cortez Acosta. The low kick entry is a layer of Spivac's game, and he used it against Tybura, and he's only going to need 1 takedown to finish this fight because he is such a good finisher on the ground. Spivac uses his kicks to set up his boxing, and he throws his fists to inner range to begin a clinch. The sequence goes a few leg kicks at range, close the distance, throw a couple of hooks in sequence, maybe 2 or 3, slip off to the side, and then get in on those hips. And he's really good at transitioning the level changes from the boxing whenever he's in close on the cage and finishing takedowns from the clinch or whatever position that he ends up with once he wraps up his hands. Spivac is going to find a way to make his wrestling offense work in this fight, and then he's going to smother Waldo. Waldo Cortez Acosta will be aggressive early, and this will favor him. But as I said before, this is favoring the archetype of a striker-grappler matchup, and Spivac is too good at grappling for Waldo Cortez Acosta. Acosta's best shot at winning would be the Derek Lewis Classic, where he can perfectly time a strike on one of Spivac's entries, the Edson Barbosa Classic, the Curtis Blades versus Jailton Almeida Classic, the Edson Barbosa versus Benil Dariush Classic. I'm not sure if this guy has a flying jump knee in him, but if he did, that would be spectacular. Waldo Cortez Acosta wins this fight, and then he gets Curtis Blades or Pavlovich next, but he will need to display some serious skills here. I don't think that he has it in him. I think that Spivac is going to win this fight via round 1 submission. We're into the main prelims now. I'm not sure. I think this is going to be the second to last prelim fight. It will be Azamat Murzakonov versus Brendson Ribeiro. And I'm not sure if you guys feel the same way, but until the story develops a little bit more, Azamat Murzakonov is the real Azamat and not Azamat Bekoyev. If he loses this fight though, he may not be the real Azamat. especially since Azamat Bakoyev, as I was on my phone, I saw he just got match made with Torres Finney. We'll talk about that one on another event, but we'll see who wins their fight and who loses their fight. And that's who the real Azamat is. One thing that's hurting Azamat Murzakonov's in the running is the fact that he has been busted for juicing. And he's just gotten off suspension from November 1st, 2024. And he just got unbanned on May 1st, 2025. This was a fight with Alonzo Minifield. He pissed hot and he got banned. I'm really beginning to understand the basis of these matches the more I go over them. The solution to any physical advantages that Azamat may have from residual gains from cheating 6 months ago, or if he never came off the sauce and found a loophole, is going to be to give him a physically strong fighter to compete with. If they both arm wrestled, I could see Brendson Ribeiro winning or them tying. So this is going to come down to MMA and not just raw strength or any type of physical advantages one may have over the other person. I think this is going to be the only facet of this fight that we're going to have to analyze. Not the cheating portion, that's done. And I don't think it's going to be like Carlos Leal fighting with Alex Morono. If anything, you'd think Brendson was the one on gear in this matchup. I was curious as to what a guy with Azamat's physique could even be taking to say that he's on steroids. And I found out that he was blasting LGD 4333. And this is a selective androgenic receptor module, a SARM. This guy was a SARM goblin. And I know about this thanks to Derek More Plates, More Dates. This is like the dirtiest type of anabolic compound that you can put in your body. So one thing that I will say about this ex-SARM goblin is that he does have some sneaky power, and he dropped Dustin Jacoby with a step-in jab. These strikes do end up dropping people at random moments, though, jabs where they're perfectly timed, where they're entering range. But he really put nothing on this punch, and this was probably the peak of him cheating in 2023. And Dustin Jacoby did the splits in the middle of the octagon whenever he ate this strike. And that was the only moment when watching Azamat Murzakonov's footage where I was like, Him cheating came at a complete surprise to me because he's got to be the most unassuming cheater of all time. You look at John Jones and the way that he looks, or Usman or Magomedov, and like Anderson Silva whenever he was dirty, or John Jones. Dude, you're like, man, of course they're cheating, dude. Look at them. Of course they're cheating. That's their secret. That's how they look that way. This guy does not look like he's cheating, bro. You'd never guess that this guy is on gear the way that he still gasses out and was getting taken down by Dustin Jacoby in their fight. He was getting scooped off of his feet in the third round, getting put on his butt and controlled for a little bit before making it back to the striking. Ribeiro displayed some pretty decent jiu-jitsu not too long ago against DR Nergoze, who he armbarred in round 2 of their fight, even though he has Nur and a Z in his last name. I'm going to give him some points for that. It was a pretty clean performance, too. I smell a Ribeiro knockout for some reason. This Azamat has never been the KO guy, and his grappling isn't really that effective in the way that you think that a guy with his last name would know wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Murzakonov may look like Mr. Krabs whenever he molted his shell upon return without steroids. So that's why I'm going to select Brendson Ribeiro to win via decision. But I do smell that knockout. I think that I'm just going to cover my tracks, though. Brendson Ribeiro will win a decision in this fight. At the top of the prelims, we have Bruno Silva versus Joshua Van. This is a flyweight fight, and it is a very big flyweight fight. This is clutch or kick for Joshua Van versus Bruno, the nutshot merchant. If you saw that Manel Cap fight, how many low blows? It was like 3, and they took a point. The last time that he failed on his path to the title, Joshua Van, it was against Charles Johnson, and that guy is a mutant flyweight. So I still pick Joshua Van under the assumption that he's not fighting with a guy who has the same type of physicality as Charles Johnson ever again in his career in flyweight. That dude is like a super mega weight bully. Bruno Silva is a finisher. He was on like a nice little 4-fight win streak before it got snapped by Manel Cap. And I see a lot of overlap between Manel Cap and Joshua Van's games as far as the striking goes. And going back to that 4-fight run that Bruno Silva was on, Joshua Van would have totally finished those guys too. They did share an opponent in Cody Durden, who Silva KO'd in round 2. Well, Van did take to a decision, but he also took him to death's door. If you did watch that fight, he beat the tar out of that dude. Van and Cap share a likeness in the way that their boxing works, in the way that they compound damage over time with their peppering style. They both fight like flyweight Nick Diaz is. Cap is physically stronger than Van, though, so he gets to finishes easier with his hands whenever they're just boxing, but they both share in having some pretty bulletproof takedown defense. Makayev eroded Caps in their fight, but Muhammad Makayev is the most skilled flyweight on the earth, and he's just a nightmare for the UFC to deal with, and he's not fun to watch, so we don't care about watching him become champion. But Makayev was the chosen one, dude, and he actually was the best fighter in the world. And he probably still is, but nobody's gonna give him a chance, and nobody's losing sleep over it either. Cap is probably cleaner than Van due to the diversity of his strike arsenal and the added power, which adds fear to whenever he's landing combinations over and over again on his opponents. But I was watching the Bruno Silva fight, Manel Cap versus Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva was trying to throw a lead teep kick to create space against Manel Cap, and he was kicking him in the balls. And he did this 3 times. The ref takes a point, and in the finishing sequence in the 3rd round, Manel Cap throws the most deliberate low blow, an inside leg kick aimed directly at Bruno Silva's cup. And he was teeing off on Bruno Silva all throughout this fight and in the finishing sequence, but Silva didn't grimace or begin to move back into the cage and fall down until this kick landed. So Bruno Silva was finished by Manel Cap with a nut shot. That's what I'm going to go with. And that's not to say he didn't get worked, but Van put a brutal beating on Cody Durden in a boxing masterclass the same way that Manel Cap beat up Bruno Silva. I would go as far as to say if he never threw that intentional nut shot, Manel Cap, this fight probably would have gone to decision. Another layer of this is going to be Cap being better than Van defensively, who leaves himself open to get hit by big winged shots. Whenever he gets ahead in fights, he'll feel the momentum and he'll get inside and throw 16, 25 punch combos, and he'll get hit by just some random winged overhand in the middle of these sequences. And he'll take them, but against a fighter like Charles Johnson, he wasn't able to weather these really hard punches, and they did put him out. And Bruno Silva does have a few knockouts with his hands over some guys who aren't the best, but they're still UFC level talent, and he's making them look like nothing, whether or not they are still in the organization. But I will select him to score a late stoppage of his own, just because I like Joshua Van. I'm not about to go against him here. Joshua Van via round 3 KO TKO. Let's keep eyes out for that. No matter how this fight goes, we're going to see a very high display of skills from Joshua Van no matter what. And everyone who knows ball understands that Joshua Van has been the best prospect at this weight class for so long. And it's so lit that he's actually in the rankings now and can move towards the belt. We need Joshua Van to be a title challenger. So he's got to pull this one off. Round 3 KO. The top of the main card will be Vicente Luque versus Kevin Holland. Holland blocked my Instagram account, man. I made a video called Defining Kevin Holland Syndrome, my Beowulf MMA Instagram account. Follow me on Instagram. This video that I made, though, it outlines how some fighters let off the gas in big fights and try less to spare themselves the humiliation of defeat. The point that I made with the Kevin Holland mindset in that video is that some will only step up and try in fights like this, Vicente Luque, against past their prime fighters who previously suffered brain hemorrhaging, or young fighters who are cans, or just journeymen. He blocked me over the fact that I made a poll on my IG asking my followers if they thought that Jekah Souza, Marquel Oleksiejczuk, and Gunnar Nelson were quality wins. I said something like Kevin Holland always blows the yearly opportunity that he gets for the organization to build hype for him, and that he underperforms whenever he gets a big fight, and he only steps up whenever he fights cans. And he saw this comment and he was like, don't speak poorly of Jekah Souza, Gunnar Nelson, or Marquel Oleksiejczuk again. And so I made this poll and I was like, do you guys think that these are good wins in middleweight? Or do you think that these guys are legends? And people said that they were. And he was still like, send me the poll results before I block you, Kevin Holland. So I did, and he fucking blocks me, bro. But I mean, I'm not gonna be spiteful towards him in the fact that this happened. I'm not gonna let a jaded mentality towards the fact that he blocked me on Instagram make me pick against him like I'm 8 years old. He probably does kill this guy, but that's if Luque holds this fight on the feet, and he's not gonna do that. And I think that Holland is notorious for beating this level of opponent in the UFC, because whenever he's match made with the MVPs, the Wonder Boys, the JDMs, he goes ghost and he looks like a CIA clone of himself whenever he's fighting guys who either don't play to his strengths or grapple him. And that could be Vicente Luque, if this is the Vicente Luque of old, as he kind of displayed against Thimbo Garimbo last time. Luque proved that he wasn't completely washed in this fight, and he finished it in the first round like he was supposed to. A fight with Holland is interesting because someone is 100% getting Darce choked here. Holland needs to play range and try to end this fight in as little time as possible, because if he allows himself to get set on the cage by Luque, the possibility for the wrestling to be opened up from a cage clinch leaves Holland seriously vulnerable here. Luque getting knocked out means the end of his career, and Holland getting choked out by Luque kind of means the same thing for him in terms of not having another weight class to try to make the rankings in. 155-pound Holland is coming soon if he loses this fight. He could come out and beat Vicente Luque like Jeff Neal did, But one thing that I noted in that fight was whenever the takedown started to come against Jeff Neal was sprawling really well and counter wrestling amazingly that night. And we've never seen these types of moves out of Kevin Holland. There's a good shot that Vicente Luque can get this fight onto the ground and sub Kevin Holland and pull off the Darce. And for some reason, I actually do kind of feel like it's going that way. Whenever we talk about Kevin Holland in 2025, I'm not sure if we're talking about a serious dude who actually like wants to be here anymore. I'm sure he likes some money, and we all like money, but I'm not sure if he really loves this shit, you know? There's no question as to whether Vicente Luque does or not. He's damn near died a couple of times. Luque via round 1 submission, via being a lifelong martial artist who's more committed to the sport than Kevin Holland. That's as deep as I'm going with it. The next fight is going to be Mario Bautista versus Patchy Mix. I don't believe in glazing fighters just because we don't like his opponent. I'm very vehemently against this. I don't think that not liking one guy is enough reason to do all the mental gymnastics that's required to favor another fighter to beat them, who realistically we don't think wins this fight. We call Mario Bautista trash because he beat Jose Aldo in a fight. Think about that. He shut down a guy, Jose Aldo, who usually has a couple or at least one big moment in all of his fights. This is a top 4 featherweight of all time. Mario Bautista beat him with more control than the champion who won the fight in the same grappling positions with 2 minutes less control. Merab had a less impressive victory over Jose Aldo from the stat sheet and in terms of overall control. Mario Bautista also has wins over fighters like Miles Johns, Ricky Simone, and Damone Blackshear, who are all likely good enough to fraud check a Bellator champion, or to go into Bellator and beat all of the different contenders who Patchy Mix was making his defenses against in Bellator. Patchy Mix had 2 fights with Magomed Magomedov, who is not a guy you get clout off of for winning a trilogy against. That dude is not very good. Peter Yan once fought Magomedov in a Russian promotion, and he brutalized that guy in the clinch with knees, and he prevented his takedowns by sprawling everything. Magomed is a grappler who doesn't run the pipe to complete his takedown, so Patchy was able to freeze his grappling by sprawling or by pulling guillotines that he finished their first fight with. Because he would start the takedown and just drop down to his knees and not run the pipe and drive through it to finish the takedown against the cage or wherever they ended up once he completed the takedown. These entries were horrible, dude. Mix has very few fights that can be considered held with UFC level opponents. People are reposting this clip of him step-in-kneeing Rafael Stotts while he went for a takedown, and they're like, please God, Patchy Mix, have one of these in store for Mario Bautista. Rafael Stotts was a dude who got knocked out by Merab. That was the guy who earned him a UFC contract because he got knocked out by Merab in front of Dana White. This is not a serious dude. And Kyoji Horiguchi, like, this is not a for real guy either. And he's also in the UFC now. These are not UFC level fighters. These are in the tier of like barely passable UFC prospects who come from these types of organizations. Certainly nothing standout. These fighters are still okay bantamweights, but you couldn't convince me for a second that Song Yadong wouldn't be able to sleep all of the people that we've been talking about from this Bellator promotion right now. I think that Patchy Mix gets burned up really badly by a guy who's a lot worse than Mario Bautista. If they gave Patchy Mix Corey Sandhagen, who was the last guy to beat Mario Bautista by finish, Patchy would be retiring from the sport. Mario Bautista himself has 4 finishes in the UFC. We see time and time again that champions from other promotions who are exclusively MMA brasses are often bad at producing talent to rival top UFC contenders. Like, we're better off pulling fighters from Glory and K1 kickboxing. Even if it looks good at the start, like with Michael Chandler, they always end up showing that they aren't at the level that they need to be to compete in the UFC at some point. Pitbull is a very recent example of this, but other than that, the only fighters that we really have who made it from Bellator and actually had successful careers in the UFC are going to be Alexander Volkov, who's currently active, and like Eddie Alvarez. Bellator champions in general just can't hang. So hopefully Pico's fight with Evloev will not be on theme just because I don't want to see Evloev win another fight in the UFC. But I think Mix will be unable to replicate the Stotts KO here, and he probably just gets choked. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt even and say that it takes 3 rounds. Mario Bautista via round 3 submission is how this fight ends. The feature fight of this event will be Joe Pyfer versus Kelvin Gastelum. Smokin' Joe Pyfer. In my head, I always felt like Joe Pyfer was always going to knock out Kelvin Gastelum. And if I were to have leaned on the predictions that I was going to make before this fight fell through, I would have probably said that Joe Pyfer knocked out Kelvin Gastelum like a month ago. And I really did think that Pyfer getting the runs saved Kelvin Gastelum's ass, and it made it so that he could get a couple of wins before getting brutally knocked out by this power puncher in a rematch of scheduling. But I'm glad they kept this fight together, and that Joe Pyfer didn't have some serious problems that made it so that Kelvin Gastelum had to go get booked elsewhere. But I've had the same sentiment that Kelvin Gastelum was food in fights against guys like Chris Curtis or Jared Cannonier, and even Robert Whittaker. He fought Robert Whittaker. And I don't know why, but Kelvin Gastelum, he's not allowed to get chinned. And I think it's because my mother said so. My mom told me that Kelvin Gastelum isn't allowed to get knocked out, so it just hasn't happened in the UFC. So for as much as I want to see Kelvin Gastelum get his chin spun around his face like the bill of Daffy Duck whenever he's hit point blank in the face with the shotgun in Looney Tunes, I always did have this underlying feeling that's growing stronger as we approach this fight week, that Joe Pyfer can't knock out Kelvin Gastelum for some reason. Gastelum is actually one of the best gatekeepers at 185. That's true to this day, and it has been for years. The next tier above Gastelum as a UFC gatekeeper in middleweight is Jack Hermansson, who has wins over both Kelvin and Joe Pyfer. Pyfer is a lot like middleweight Josh Emmett, and the key to winning a fight with him is not getting knocked out, and Kelvin Gastelum is unfinishable. Much more complete and dangerous strikers than body bags Joe Pyfer have tried and failed to sleep Kelvin Gastelum out cold successfully. I still think that Gastelum is a hard fight to win in 2025. And he has this really bad habit of forcing things instead of flowing through sequences to find finishes. Kelvin has proven ever since the Adesanya fight that you can't just mog him. And fighters who try their best to come out and put him away like he's easy work usually just don't. And it's a coin flip most of the time with Joe Pyfer. He either looks like Ginger Ngannou or he's horrible at fighting. The verdict is still out since he hasn't fought very much, but this fight will answer many questions. I wonder if he's going to be suffering any residual effects from that injury that he suffered on the Contender Series. This guy got high single-legged by Dustin Stoltzfus, and he posted on his arm to try to break his fall with it. And what do you think happened? It went like... And so he was out for a long time. And I wonder what that type of injury, like, I don't even know how you come back from that. And that was his right hand too. So there's no way that hasn't diminished even a little bit of his knockout potential. And he needs all of it that he can get in a fight against Kelvin Gastelum. Our co-main event restroom break will be Kayla Harrison versus Juliana Pena. I'm actually not going to be going anywhere for this. I'm going to watch this fight. If Pena somehow wins this fight, she's the greatest WMMA fighter. One of them at least. And I think that she's going to be greater all time than pretty much every woman who isn't Amanda Nunes, who she already has a win over, and they're going to be 1-1 in the trilogy. If Juliana Pena wins, and Amanda Nunes doesn't come out of retirement to fight her, low-key she might be ducking, while she's still like training and staying active, maybe target a return depending on who wins this fight. Amanda Nunes would be forced to put that to rest if Juliana Pena somehow manages to beat Kayla Harrison. I was pretty much scratching my nutsack the whole time, but I kind of felt like Pennington for sure won her fight against Pena, who did just enough to sketch out a decision. But nobody cares because Pena's annoying. And this weight class has been putting on some pretty bad fights. And she carries these fights with her mic skills. Because the fights that she's been involved in, minus Amanda Nunes and Kayla Harrison, are just boring and uninteresting and nobody cares about them. She does kind of build a little bit of hype whenever she talks. She's just very annoying. Kayla Harrison is so overpowered as a woman, and she can only be defeated by the scales in this weight class, I'm convinced. I can't believe that Arman Sarukian said that he would crack this forbidden muscular shit. Kayla Harrison is not getting hit, and Arman is sicker than syphilis for saying this. Somebody gotta check that boy's search history, man. He probably gooed into some crazy shit. Kayla's kind of an enigma, because she chose a weird time to go to the UFC. It was right after she took a loss in PFL. She had already beaten the woman who did beat her, Larissa Pacheco, one time. And as far as the other woman that we're talking about, Larissa Pacheco, she's also lost to Jessica Andrade in her prime, and also prime Jermaine Durandamy. Kayla Harrison left the UFC instead of doing the trilogy with this woman, and she's most recently lost to Chris Cyborg, this Larissa Pacheco lady. So as far as like a female Michael Jordan goes at the heavier weight classes, we kind of have one worked out in Shevchenko at the lower one, but even still, her record isn't perfect. Kayla Harrison and Amanda Nunes both have weird spots on their record. This Larissa Pacheco fight for Kayla Harrison is weird, and it was an interesting choice that she made to not put a cap on this before looking onto something else. If we're going to talk about the woman Michael Jordan of female bantamweight, it's got to be Amanda Nunes, but she really messed up her legacy badly by losing to Juliana. Even if she ended up getting it back, That first fight bolsters the hell out of Juliana's image and her confidence, and she's 1-1 with Amanda, and can say that Amanda Nunes retired so she didn't have to fight her 3 times. Even if it's untrue, Amanda Nunes isn't clamoring for that fight, so I mean, she gets to get away with saying this online. Nobody's going to confront her or check her about it. Juliana Pena is kind of like the UFC's Linda Pacheco, and their careers are going to have a full circle moment after Pena goes 1-1 with a great from her promotion and then gets skunked by another great from a different promotion. Pena is a fighter who doesn't show much regard for herself in terms of defense and will leave herself susceptible to being dropped in an effort to get on the inside and try to wrestle. She isn't a bad grappler, and I do commend her for not being boring in the sense of trying to preserve herself so that nothing happens. She actually will take risks to make sure that she's advancing the fights and winning on the scorecards. Kayla Harrison is just so good, and she's just such a good grappler, and she's so strong, and she demonstrated this against Ketlen Vieira, who we saw last week actually has a grappling bag that she used on Macy Casson. Kayla simply robbed her of the opportunity to utilize it just by being so much better than her. That win over Ketlen Vieira is only going to age better over time, and for this to be her first win in the UFC, it showed that even whenever her and her opponent are good at the same things, her strengths are just so superior. So Kayla Harrison is going to win a decision. I really think that she finishes this fight. I just don't know how, so I'm going to call the decision. She'll be the new champion of 135, and I think that'll be healthy for our viewership because this belt has just been pretty Mickey Mouse ever since Amanda Nunes left. Kayla Harrison is a legitimate champion, and we're all going to accept and celebrate her. The main event will be Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili, the bantamweight title fight. This will be a rematch, and I'm very excited for this fight. I'm not even like going to grimace or make some type of sarcastic, funny joke about how nobody wants to watch this. Sean O'Malley is my favorite bantamweight champion ever, and people definitely like him more than they let on for the fact that nobody started a petition for this rematch to get canceled. Whenever it was announced, I didn't even see anybody have that crazy of a backlash towards it. I'm very convinced that people don't like Merab. They just hate the guys from Dagestan and they don't want to see any more of them become champion. And they mess with Merab for the fact that he's a good foil to that style. But the thing that's confusing to me about it is how they'll dump on these fighters from Dagestan and they won't acknowledge any of the crossover that their styles have. And they won't acknowledge that Merab is pretty much the same as one of these Dagestan fighters, or if anything, just has a more refined version of their style. And one thing that he's noticing as he's becoming more developed and better at fighting his fights, he has the freedom to strike with anyone that he's matchmade with, since for 25 minutes, they're going to be so afraid of the takedown that they'll forget to protect themselves with the striking. And they know that takedown is going to come, and it still does, but instead of just getting taken down, they eat an 8-punch combo and then get taken down. In order for Sean O'Malley to win this fight, he just needs to accept that Merab is going to wrestle, and he needs to go for it whenever he has the chance on the feet. JDM did this perfectly in his fight with Bilal Muhammad. Bilal Muhammad has a crazy wrestling threat, and what did JDM do? He showed no regard for it. He fought Bilal the same way that he took the fight with Basil Hafez. He showed no respect for the grappling or the takedown, and he was able to capitalize on the fact that, like Merab in this matchup is also talking about, Bilal is pretty motivated to prove his striking. By the time that Bilal tried to wrestle, he wasn't all there because he'd been getting punched, and the takedowns were super easy for JDM to stuff. And that was because he beat the brakes off of Bilal Muhammad early on in the fight. In this match, Sean, he can't snipe. He can't be clean. If he waits, Merab can think and plan all 5 rounds in his head before executing whatever plan he comes up with. Sean can't wait for that same step back counter like he did with Aljo. He's got to go first, and he's got to be aggressive. We have to see levels of aggression from O'Malley that we've never seen before. He needs to sprint like he was fighting Julian Paiva, or like he was fighting Chris Mutino. If he plans on winning, that is, he must take advantage of the fact that he's a better striker than Merab at the very beginning of this fight. He needs to do damage, like real damage. If a cut isn't opened up by round 1 or 2, he's behind, and he's not doing well. You gotta hurt Merab in order to make him less effective in his style. Before, I thought Sean O'Malley had 3 rounds to get a knockout due to fatigue as a factor that would prevent it from happening later on, but Sean really has 2 rounds to produce meaningful damage with his striking before he breaks down mentally and checks out of the fight. That's really what happened. Sean O'Malley, he didn't even get tired in the last fight. He was completely fine. It's just the mental defeat, and that took place rounds before the fight was over. If he fucks this up, Sean O'Malley's path back to the belt is going to be so long and grindy, and he will not enjoy being a contender again. I know he's not going to like it. Fighters like him, they have to be champ. It's just part of their persona. He's not going to be the same, and he may go on a crazy losing skid if he fails this time. I'm hoping that not chiefing or beating off is exactly what he needs to take this one home. I'm not going to predict a knockout. I think that it's important that Sean O'Malley beats this guy. I think that Sean O'Malley needs to outskill this guy and win convincingly to the point where we all accept him as legitimate. He will have done something that Umar couldn't do with all of the hype and actual skills that he does possess. O'Malley via decision, you guys are probably going to think that I'm a drunk man, but I could see this fight being a striker grappler matchup that plays pretty similarly to JDM versus Bilal. That's the framework. That's the game plan. If I'm Tim Welsh, I'm setting up a TV inside of the sauna and we're watching Bilal versus JDM every single day after training. You need to be mean and you need to be nasty and you need to be more of a threat with your striking than he is a threat with his wrestling, to where whenever he gets in on those takedowns, you can just shrug them off and they don't even matter. I need him to do this for 5 rounds and to be perfect, just to show the world that this title run isn't going to be the same and that it's safe to actually be a fan of him this time. So now we have the full recap of all my predictions. On the prelims, we have Salkilld via round 1 KO, Yu via round 1 submission, Wang via brutal round 1 KO, Choinski via round 2 submission, Williams via round 2 KO, Spivac via round 1 submission, Ribeiro via decision, Joshua Van via round 3 TKO. On the main card, we have Vicente Luque via round 1 submission, Mario Bautista via round 3 submission, Kelvin Gastelum via decision, Kayla Harrison via decision, and Sean O'Malley via decision. So those are going to be my picks. It kind of looks crazy all spread out right there. That Sean O'Malley via decision pick is crazy, man. I'm not even going to lie to y'all. I'll risk being wrong about it, though, just because this is a fighter that I really enjoy watching fight, and for him to be champion of bantamweight would do a lot for me in being interested in that division. So hopefully we get the good ending this time. We're about to watch Sean O'Malley get waterboarded for 25 minutes again, aren't we? And then next week, we're going to have a heavy heart again, man, because we're hosting a UFC Fight Night card in Heartbreak City where Joaquin Buckley is going to be fighting Kamaru Usman. And I was just thinking about it, man. I'm excited to watch this fight, and I've been talking about the big Buckley KOs and stuff, but in order for Buckley to knock out Usman, Usman has to get knocked out. And if Buckley loses, then the same thing is probably going to happen to him. And that's not going to bring me any type of satisfaction watching it on the inside. I'll feel less if Buckley knocks out Usman, just because young prospects, we got to build those guys up. But, man, if Buckley takes a bad loss to Usman, dude, ooh, I might go hide. Like, you may not see me for a little bit. That's going to hurt my feelings. So I'll be back with the predictions for that. We got to get through this week first. I'll have more coverage on Merab versus Sean O'Malley because it's a very interesting fight no matter when it takes down or how many times they hold it. If Sean O'Malley loses again, I think that they should just keep on having like a yearly attempt for Sean O'Malley to fight Merab until he wins the fight, and then they'll progress the division from there. I'm going to call Dana White after this. I'm going to suggest the idea to him, and he's going to be like, "What was the question?" "Yeah, I think that we should do that. It's a good idea, kid." So if you made it to this point in the video, please do like, comment, and subscribe. I will catch you fellas in the next one. Very good fight card.